Darya sharara, do sharare, no.
I was grieving for the world. I mean, I was just grieving about all the heartache and all the sickness, and it was kind of like the whole world got MS. It was weird. Like they were having all these symptoms, like extreme fatigue, and I'm like, I know about that. Or you lose your sense of taste or smell. Oh, I know about that. And it's like the whole freaking world got it. I mean, it's not funny, but
I think a lot of people had grief because they felt that their reality was coming apart, whether it was COVID or whether it was the political landscape or whatever it was. There was a lot of that was going on that people had to cope with.
There's a lot of grief. There was a lot of grief because our lives were interrupted. It felt like our communities crumpled. We were all somewhat isolated. We could talk on the phone, or like I did. That's why I started the walking with my neighbors, because we needed some company. We needed some activity. So we go on short walks together, 6 feet apart. There was an enormous amount of grief. And there was grief because, well, there's grief in the uncertainty, right? I had another friend who just moved to Italy. And boy, she was really struggling over there because she got really sick with COVID. And so the potentiality for everyone getting sick and dying for the first time on a huge scale, it was very, 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 very difficult to deal with. A lot of emotions that needed to be processed. And you have to come to terms with a lot of fears, don't you?
Because I am a psychotherapist, a lot of people started coming in to therapy because of long COVID and of losing people. So there was a greater experience of intense grief. And it's the kind of grief, I'd call it really disenfranchised, because it's something that had happened unexpectedly for all of us. It wasn't on any of our roadmaps that this was going to happen in our lifetime or to our family members. So I think in that way, the grief that came in about COVID was a different kind of grief. It's like a faith testing, getting something unexpected like that, and all the different ways that it hit people's lives was really like a diamond with 1,000 facets from my experience. Life-changing for people that got it and life-changing for people that didn't get it. And just an increased awareness also about gratitude and how fast things can come and go and change us.
It's very interesting because my daughter is a grief counselor and she's also a narcissist counselor. So she never wanted to do her work from home. She always wanted to meet with people. And she has become totally different. And she's in her mid-40s. And I had to sort of counsel her. And it wasn't that somebody died, but she had felt the death of freedom, I guess is the best word. She didn't feel like she could go anywhere and do anything, and she felt lonely.
I think most of us were still under so much grief from my mom passing that COVID was kind of secondary. It was just kind of like an inconvenience because I've got things to do. I've got things I got to wrap up. I've got things I need to settle. And now I can't go anywhere. I can't do anything. I'm stuck at home.
And also, I mean, my husband, I had to help him through a lot. We had to take turns. You know how that goes. He was up, then I was down, and I was down, he was up, whatever. We were definitely emotionally fragile. We would cry at the drop of a hat for nothing, for no reason. Just like I said, I'd go in the garage and I would just sob because my middle one, it was their senior year of high school. And I just thought, oh my God, you know, my other one, he was in seventh grade. And it's like seventh grade is bad enough, let alone when you got to go to virtual school. Gym, we had to do virtual gym.
One of the grief experiences that I had was I was looking at, my kids were at that age where they were missing proms and they were missing homecomings and they were missing some of the things that we got to do that they couldn't. I grieved that for them.
I never saw my kids until December 2020. And what we did was we got one of those tents and put it in the front yard and put chairs all around the sides of the tent. And we had Christmas out there in 30 degrees, just so we could be with masks, so we could all be together. And so I think there was some grief around not being able to be with her family that my daughter was feeling.
I had the grief on the lockdown because my daughter-in-law was pregnant with my very first grandchild, and they live like 5 streets away from me. But that was nothing compared. That's selfishness on my part. But I mean, come on. Hey, but it was nothing compared to the grief that other people were going through. Of course, I realized, but it was painful for me. And then because we had to protect the baby, they weren't really having anyone over to their house either. So it was a while before I got to get to know my granddaughter.
My mother-in-law passed and she ended up with COVID. And she was very strong. But when she got COVID, it made her so weak that she couldn't survive. And my granddaughter, that was her senior year. Everything was shut down. She didn't go to primes. She didn't get to do any of that. I don't think there's anybody that wasn't touched in some way with COVID, really. If it was a friend, a neighbor, an auntie, or a cousin, or a friend of a friend, or, I just feel like it touched all of us.
Dealing with grief came before, where I had to end my relationship with my mother. And that was a dark night of the soul moment. And that happened just before COVID. I think in a way it kind of I think it happened before as preparation for what was coming.
Friends that were really close, we would have dinners outside with them. They don't live in the area, but they had a house and they Airbnb it, right? But they would come into town and we would visit with them. And we always had separate tables outside, not a problem. And they even told us we were in their bubble until the vaccination thing happened. And then they cut us off. And, we've been friends. I've known him longer than I've known my husband, which is about 44 years or something like that. He just stopped calling and texting. And he would come down here and he wouldn't get a hold of us. And we found out through a friend, a mutual friend, that he was coming down here. That was very hurtful. I understand he didn't want to be close physically. Okay, but there's texting and there's phones, and he just cut all that out. I considered him family. He was at my son's birth. We always had a close friendship. So that blew my mind, and Adrian's too.
I'm sure I was depressed because I had known these people for all of my life. This was the kind of close-knit family that every summer all of our cousins would come to our home and we would be together for 3 months. And so all of these relationships that I had had to sever, they were very close. It's what we call our karmic family that we come into in these incarnations, or however you want to look at it. And I had been with these people for a very long time. So it was very much conditioning, and also culturally, it's what my severing ties was something that is unheard of. It's just not something that anybody does. You do everything for family. Everything is sacrificial and everything stems from guilt. And so the grief was basically, like, I can look at it in two tiers. One is spiritually removing the lower vibration chakras, clearing them. That's just from a spiritual perspective. From the grief, the true grief, yeah, it was so hard. I didn't want to hurt anybody. It's incredibly challenging to explain to people that, it's one of those, it's not you, it's me, kind of moments. But the reality is that they cannot understand why you're moving in a different direction. But where I was not bringing me any joy. And so when you talk about grief, I'm just trying to think of, I'm like, did I cry? It felt really horrible. I know that I went through all of these emotions. I think mostly rejection and disbelief. Like, I couldn't believe the action that triggered my decision to sever ties, type of thing. And reliving it, replaying it in my head, and having to remember those incidents and the cruelty and the meanness and all of these things, I was just in disbelief. So I went through a range of emotions, and I would say that the hardest piece was I had grown up with all of these people around me all of my life. And when people would say, well, what friends are coming to this gathering, I'd be like, well, my family's coming. We were super, 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 super close. And I think that the hardest part was just having to admit and really process the concept that my daughter was not going to have that same thing.
The other thing that I really grieved is that at the beginning of COVID, as an adult thing, I would get together with my friends and do, of course, the mature adult American thing and have virtual happy hours. So we started with our virtual happy hours. Remember those? It would be like, okay, everybody, let's get on, let's have a virtual happy hour. And it was during that time that I started to realize that people I had known for a really long time, people that I had considered good long-term friends, had some very different beliefs than I would have expected. And it took me back a little bit. And as time went on and the happy hours got less happy because the conversations became more, towards the end, almost combative, I realized I'm going to have to step back here so that we can still maybe be distant friends. But I guess I was kind of mourning that sense of, oh yeah, we're friends, so we think alike, and we do, we like the same music, so there was that realization that people close to me, including family, I was struggling with their thought process. I was struggling with their belief process. And I know they were struggling with mine too. And there was some grief in having to step away from people that had been in my life for so many years. So the grief for us, although we didn't have as much of the COVID death grief, was more of the realization that I'm wondering how this relationship can withstand this, and we're going to have to step back. That was the hardest thing.
I wrote, I'm just trying to remember some of the coping things that I did. I wrote letters to each of the family members and I sent light and love at the end. But I wrote every single thing that was joyful, what caused anger. So I wrote to like, I don't know, over 200 people in my family. And I just wrote and I released like a lot of the anger, a lot of the sadness. And I did these rituals. And also my meditation helped a lot at that time. But I mean, it was grief. I was definitely sad. I didn't want to speak to anybody and I didn't want to explain myself because I felt that they had no self-reflection based on everything that they knew that I had experienced. These are such narcissistic human beings. It's so layered. I went through a lot of grief because I had to let go of these people. But I felt like, oh my God, the universe is giving me this time. It's just giving me the space. And I started to really, really understand what it meant to have boundaries and to say no and to just be like, no, I'm not going to try to explain this any further. It's a decision that I've made. And I understand that you may not understand it. You are only able to see something in your own perspective. Therefore, you will never be able to understand this, no matter how much I try to explain it. You're just not, you're not going to understand that this is so hard to do because I'm making a conscious choice to do it, kind of thing, if that makes any sense.
I'm still grieving, to be honest. I'm just grieving at I'm sad. I'm sad at the state of the world. I'm sad at the state of America. I'm just sad at the state of how we treat each other. I just cannot believe that how mean we are. I mean, that was just hammered home to me during COVID. Just how people are so concerned with themselves and they can't broaden their worldview at all to help others.
I think it was traumatic. I think there's a lot of trauma in the United States every country was different, but for the United States, there was also a lot politically happening. And so I think a lot of people felt it just felt traumatizing. The whole thing felt like insult to injury in a lot of ways. And I think this coming around again and going through an election cycle, because everyone remembers the election of 2020. I think coming around this next cycle, I think people are dealing with their trauma. I think they're being triggered by certain things. And I think there's a lot of layers to this, I think, for the United States. And like I said, every country is different. They all had their own stuff. But I think for the United States, it's been a very layered experience. And we're still pulling back the layers and trying to heal.
You know, quite honestly, I didn't have time to grieve. I was so busy. Every day we were doing 16-hour shifts, 20-hour shifts sometimes. In a sense, that helped me just put my head down and just keep doing what I was doing because I knew I had to do it. I was part of the team and that was my job. It was my livelihood. And, you know, I kind of just put my head down and dealt with it. Colleagues passing, inmates, patients passing away. Like I said, it becomes a normal sort of thing in that line of work. When you work in the hospital, and in this case, in the pandemic, it was a little different because there were higher rates of death. But I don't know if I ever dealt with the grief like I should have.
And some people, because we'd gone through the pandemic and because it was all so much, some people put off grieving until after the we could finally let down and, okay, we got the vaccine. Okay, we're back to, we're kind of there's some normalcy. Then people started to grieve because they kind of put it off in that mode that we were all in, clutching the walls and being like, scared of our groceries and everything else. I think some people put off grieving until it was done. And so you have this whole other wave of people who didn't grieve or put it off.
One of the things that you had asked about was, how did I grieve through COVID? And, I don't think I did, because I kept my mind busy. I kept my mind occupied. I kept myself focused on the positive and what the positive things were that were coming out of this. And one of the things, and I've said this to a lot of clients, everyone is saying or had been saying, oh, I wish I had more time with my family. Hey, guess what? Universe heard, you got it. Take advantage of it. So instead of focusing on all the negative aspects of it, look to the positive. Look at some of the good things that came out of it. And I do believe that because of the attitude I had, and because I didn't lose anybody, I didn't grieve. If my dad had been alive and was in a nursing home, it would have been a lot worse. And as much as I wish he was still alive, I'm honestly glad that he wasn't here to go through that.
A lot of grief, a lot of grief. Grieving all the people that we lost unnecessarily, a lot of them.
There was one incident that was really striking in that someone that I met through the channel, as the channel was starting to grow, a man-woman partnership team, they were both astrologers, they were watching my videos, and they liked what I was saying because they were as anti-Trump as everyone else. So this was a friendship that started in late 2020. And then in 2021, in February, she passed away. She just died unexpectedly. And it was quite a shock. I remember that really took me aback because even though I had never been in person with her, we had connected and we even noticed we had a lot of similar ways of thinking. We had both astrologers, of course, but also connected to the Sufi teachings. And so we knew some people from different parts of the world and so forth. So that was quite challenging to experience. But it was not COVID related. It was just more the timing of it.
I did have a fair amount of people die on me. My brother and a good friend died in the summer of 2020. And I think Adrian had a cousin that died in 2020. He did die in that period where you couldn't go to a funeral. You couldn't go to a hospital. That was weird. No memorial service for these people. It's just like they dropped off the earth or something. And of course, I talked to them and did my spiritual work with them inside. And there was more. Just seems like there was a lot of death. And my brother-in-law died, not in 2020, but I think it was 21 or 22. So there was a fair amount of death I was dealing with.
My father died that year, and there's a lot of grief going on there. We had a complicated relationship. There's a lot of grief regarding just my whole family situation, and it was a real finality.
I stay in contact with, I don't know, guides, angels. My father, I talk every day. And when I'm in pain, I ask for relief for the pain in my guts because I don't like to feel that way. I don't like to feel in pain. And so if I ask for relief, I get it every single time, every time. I believe thoroughly in the other side, the afterlife, and that my family and friends. I talked to my grandson, who was a tragedy in the middle of all this. He was our biggest loss in our family. He was in the army and was killed. He wasn't overseas, but he had so much potential. He was a linguistic cryptologist specializing in Russian, head of his class. So when we lost him, it was such a big chunk out of humanity. My husband was elderly. My sister was very sick and elderly. I'm so glad that they didn't suffer at the end and their lives were already lived. But Ryan, my grandson, he had so much to give. And for that, we're still in a state of grief.
So I'm a medium, and I do a lot of communication with other people's loved ones who've passed. I connect with my guardian angels, and they are talking with your guardian angels, and then I do my best to tell you what they're saying. And they're the ones who are communicating also with the ones on the other side. And I've done a lot of that, and I pass spirits to the light. So it's one of the first things I check for. If somebody wants to talk to a loved one, I ask the guides, well, have they passed to the light? And if they don't, then the guides will pass them to the light with them. I facilitate that. And that's really important because sometimes people die and they don't know they're dead or they're on morphine or something. And it's not like a direct process. Unfortunately, I think people have to be able to, just like in the Tibetan Bardo or the whatever rituals, to get people to understand their dead, and then to be okay with walking into the light and making that transformation or that transformative journey. Sometimes you need some help. I don't remember anything in that way that's remarkable. There were definitely people who lost family members, and you have to wait for a little bit before you can really contact somebody who's made it to the other side. It was such an intense year for that. A lot of people lost loved ones.
It was traumatic. And I thought I was equipped to deal with that kind of grief. It wasn't until I'd had a incredible spiritual experience that was able to. Well, let me just explain. I had lost my mother and I was in grief with that. And there were some issues surrounding her death that were very uncomfortable. And so I had a mediumship reading. And during the mediumship reading, I was sitting in a chair alone in an apartment where I knew no one. I didn't know the neighbors, and the kitties were there. They were sound asleep. I could hear the woman's voice. And suddenly I felt like someone had opened Niagara Falls and that it was coming through my back. And there was this rush of water. It was so powerful, I could no longer hear the woman that I was talking with, and it was continuous. It was a continuous, huge rush of water coming through me. It started in my back, it moved up, and it was suddenly I couldn't hear anything. I couldn't see anything. It was like I was underwater. I could hear this water moving through me. And the best I can describe is like the continuous of waterfall, like that continuous rush. It wasn't stopping. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what was happening. I was underwater. I was underwater, and in a way that I had never experienced water before, where it was literally running through me, right? It was just moving all the way through my body. And I remember when it finally stopped, the woman said, "Okay, next." And, and I missed the whole reading. I missed the whole thing. And I sobbed. I sat in the chair and just sobbed and walked around and felt like my shoes were squeaking, like I was walking in water. So for 2 days I didn't speak to anyone. For 2 days I didn't do anything except go, "What was that?" Okay, so I researched to see if anybody else had ever experienced anything like this, and I wasn't getting anywhere with it. I knew that I felt lighter, like like I was somehow new, like nothing hurt, like nothing was sore, that nothing was blocked or achy or heavy, and the experience was almost joyous right after, in a way that was really quite magical. Other than, like when it was happening, thinking I'm drowning in a vacant apartment, in an apartment where there's no water coming in, and just amazed at what was this? What was this? So it took about 2 weeks before I could hear the reading that was coming through for me at the time. And it was incredibly significant, that also correlated with this renewal, this cleansing, this wiping out and removing and softening everything that I had gone through with that experience, to my amazement, because I did not know that I had been asking for that. And I did not know that it was possible to have that kind of experience where I didn't know what this was. So if there's anybody out there that has ever had that experience, please get in touch with me, because to this day I can remember the feeling of wet. I can remember the blurring in my eyes and my ears not hearing, like when someone's trying to talk to you and you are underwater and they're talking to you, but you can't make out what the words are. So it was really incredibly beautiful. And I sought out people that I knew that were in the religious community and asked them, had they ever heard of this? A Catholic priest who'd been in the faith for something like 80 years. And talking to a Methodist minister, pastor, asking her, had she ever heard of anything like this? Teachers that had been involved in organized religion and a wide berth of experiences. And each one of them had told me that no, that they really hadn't had anyone say anything about this deluge of water, but that as a symbol, it was very possible that it was a baptism, a renewal, a new life, a new opportunity, a newness. And that is the key word to the experience for me, was it was like everything was made new, like everything was fresh.
People in our business are usually pretty empathetic, and it can really be a hindrance because you can just become so involved in your client. And just, I had clients who just tell me these stories and I would just be like, oh my God, I had so much empathy for them. It would be a little hard to let it go. And then of course I'd be watching stuff happen on YouTube, and it just, the just general stress malaise that all of us are feeling in the world, even now, really was really strong.
I did counsel a lot of people. I always do, I can't even remember now, like, oh my goodness, so many people lost family members through grief, and or had lost their jobs, or lost their partners. So yeah, I certainly counseled my share of it.
So one of the things that I felt really pushed to do is get better at giving people options, different styles of readings, different techniques and things that I do that have to do with helping people with grief. I felt very called to be part of the solution in that, like probably anyone that does what I do, a spiritual teacher. It really is something I know that has been really become center stage in a lot of ways. And so I've definitely felt called to do that, to help with people's grief and try to ease it even just a little bit.
Everybody's different. When I'm doing my readings, I'll connect with my guides and then the other person's guides, and our guides have conversations, our guardian angels. And then I'll just try my best to tell the person what I'm hearing.
And the grief part. In fact, the lady I was just talking to, they were with grief about someone passing. I always remind them that story of this woman that had been in a marriage for 17 years, and it was horrible. The guy was horrible. And boy, was she happy when it was over. And she thought, I'll never get married again. She meets this really nice guy. And they're together 7 months, only 7 months. And he died in his sleep. So she's wailing and crying. She said, Linda, I was so upset. And then all of a sudden, I heard an angel talk to me. And it said, are you mourning because you miss him? Or are you mourning because he's alive and you're not? Like I tell people, if I could bottle up what's over there, if I could bottle it up and then throw it in your airspace and you just consume it, you wouldn't mourn another day for someone.
I did feel collective grief. Over the years, I have managed to deal with. I know that this is something that everybody has to go through, and you actually have to look at it as something that is normal and is part of life, because I've seen so many people die over my entire life. And so I have to get to a point that I say, yes, this is going to happen and there's nothing we can do about it. But let me tell you something. The grief was relieved a little bit by me knowing that consciousness is not going to remain in a dead body. This is a vessel. I know this for a fact because I can remove myself from this vessel, really. And my consciousness can travel someplace else. I know this for a fact. So for me, it's easier to deal with. I know that people who don't have that understanding or knowledge may go through some really, really hard times.
There were a lot of people that lost people. We were just fortunate that we didn't. I think some people are still working through that grief. Many people that died were contracted to do so. That was their exit point for a reason. Ever since I realized that we never die, I don't take human death that seriously anymore. Now, ask me that when somebody really, really close to me dies. But David's death didn't affect me like my father's death did, because I was already on my spiritual path and realized that we're energy. We never die. We just transcend to a different type of energy. And once I realized that and learned about contracts and all that sort of stuff, I'm kind of the wrong person to ask about death because it doesn't bother me. I can be compassionate about you losing your family, but only to a point, because some people just love to get into that grief. And they live in it and they dwell in it and they just roll in it until it overtakes them, or they finally wake up one day and go, okay, I've had enough of that shit. Let me move on. My father's death practically destroyed me. My best friend died. My role model, my hero. When you love your daddy, he's just the best. And I was pissed off for years that he left me. I had a lot of anger about it that I learned to get rid of, thanks to my husband. So I can be compassionate to a point, and then I'm just like, ugh, boy, hey. Some people just like to hold on to misery, and I'm not one of them. I learned very young, let it go. It just holds you back if you hang on to misery. And who wants to be miserable? I want to be happy. If I got to be on this damn planet, I want to be happy.
There was a great story. This doctor, you might have heard this story. I can't remember. I think she was a bone specialist. Anyway, she was canoeing or kayaking and got tossed under her canoe and was down there for 30 minutes. And she came out of her body and all she saw was a blue bloated body. That was her. And so she went through all this stuff. And she said, I'm going to tell you something, you guys. She made it. It's actually a miracle. But she said, I'm going to tell you something. There's no such thing as life than death. It's life and then even being more alive. Or there's no such thing as being conscious and then unconscious. It's conscious and then connected to the whole realm. So we have that to look forward to. But the other thing is what you do in this world determines your vibrational energy when you're over there. So you have to be kind of careful about screwing anybody over. I've had to really look at my life and ask to the higher realm to apologize, because sometimes I see how selfish I was. You don't have to be perfect. The thing I tell people is you'll have to live with what you did to others.
One thing that kept me going is my understanding of death is probably different than most people. I've experienced death in my family. My father passed away when I was 7. And also having been with my wife now, who is a healer, alternative medicine healer, and she introduced me to spirituality, spiritual life, and what it's all about. And then I started looking at it as it's not death, it's just an ending and a beginning. Like, okay, life, they came into this life form, lived their life, it was time for them to go, but the soul lives on, the energy lives on, and they're just going to the next bus stop, so to speak. They're done with their time here, they're going somewhere else. So with that, it kind of helped me deal with that, with seeing all those deaths. But I know that a lot of my colleagues and other people that I know had a really hard time processing it. I still don't know what I'm doing or how to process grief, but it helped that I had that way of thinking and my wife's support.
There was a guy that came to me one time when I was reading at Angel Heart, and this woman was there. He came through the wall in full body form, and he was really tall, and he had long, scraggly blonde hair and a beard with crystal blue eyes. That's what I remember as his eyes. So I'm describing him, and the woman's wailing, so that's his mother. And he told me exactly how he died, how he was on a motorcycle, how he put the bike down when he was heading towards an 18-wheeler. And he died right there with the 18-wheeler, but they somehow revived him. But he was still outside his body and following his body. And he even told me he could hear the screaming and the crying, and that he had a girlfriend and he had 2 children with her that At that time, he had wished he had married her. I guess he wasn't into getting married. Anyway, he looked at me with those crystal blue eyes and he said, would you please tell her I'm more alive now than when I had a body? So it's funny, when you go over there, you're confused why everybody is just wailing and crying when you want to tell them, I'm okay. I'm better than I was.
There was a point where it became really clear that I was helping people with that grief or stress or whatever, post-traumatic stress, whatever you want to call it. I had client after client after client say, Dave, your video is so important because I was really in the depths of the despair. And then your video was just encouraging me and saying, hey, let's look at what we're learning and all that stuff. They kept telling me that I and other readers were really keeping them away from despair and letting them know we are learning, we are evolving. There's a reason why this is happening. It doesn't mean it's okay, but something's good is happening. One thing I'll have to say too, is, as an empath, and pretty much all of us are pretty empathetic people, is it is really hard not to carry that around. Right? I've never imagined that I would speak to people with such horror stories of what was going on or what happened in their childhood. And of course, I want to reach and give them a hug. You can't. You have to let them cry for 5 minutes and just witness it. So I was not particularly good at metabolizing this stuff when I did it. And what happens is universe will just come in and kind of kick my butt and say, well, we're just going to stop your knees from working for a while until you learn to metabolize this better. And okay, I have to do yoga. Oh yeah, no, it's not good enough. You got to do more. And now every morning I have a whole long, elaborate process of breathing exercises and stuff like that, because you have to accept that the person that you're speaking with is on their own journey and that they will learn what they need to learn. And if what they need you to do is witness them and let them know that they're not crazy, they're right about what's happening, and you're there to witness it, and that you care about them, and that you're just saying, I'm sorry that's happening to you, is what's needed, is all they need. People really just need their pain to be witnessed by someone sometimes. But at the end of that, I have to consciously, and sometimes I'll just do this, it's not my material. It's not my material. It's not my material. And let it go and accept that I am a better medium if I don't carry all the weight of this, that I don't need to carry the weight of it. I just need to be present in the moment. And when I'm forgetting about that, I'm not forgetting them as a human. I am just letting that material go into the ether. One important thing that I really like to do when I do things like past life regression is go, hey, wow, tell me about that life. And they'll say, I did exactly what I was supposed to do in that lifetime. Or I learned that. And then I'll do this and I'll hit the bell because I really want to emphasize, hey, look at that. Look at what you learned. And I will always emphasize only you could have learned that. And that's true for anybody that's watching right now. Only you could have learned what it was like to be in this time with these kinds of stresses. And you probably made some errors. You probably learned a lot. But ultimately, if you're still alive and watching this, or even if you're not alive, you learned what you needed to know. And it's a really unique and powerful thing that you are witness to these events in our time.
Even though I think everybody had some sort of anxiety, how could you not? This is like something we never ever experienced. Being Americans, especially, we're so privileged. We're kind of protected. So this was a whole new, as we all know, a whole new way of being and living, and the anxiety.
Like this person who was like, oh yes, I'm strong. I drank a few bottles of wine. Drink a few bottles of wine.
I think there was a certain degree of trepidation that I sometimes experienced. Like, how is this really all going to come out? But I learned not to allow that to penetrate my being. or rule my actions. So if I did experience that, that was really just part of a process that I had to go through and make sure it didn't get in my way.
With all the studying we were doing, I was constantly being asked, am I going crazy? And I said, no, you're not going crazy. You're not going crazy. You're not going crazy. And I said that a lot. Thankfully, we had the swimming pool, so we could go out and exercise if we wanted to. And it was nice. And it was in the backyard. And we usually didn't have a lot of people over then anyway. We also got out every day to look at the ocean and absorb the ozone from it. It was really nice to be able to sit and watch the waves, just watch the water. And it was very comforting and soothing, and it was really good. So we didn't feel like we were deprived. It was kind of hard once in a while because you couldn't go out to eat. We were real careful about that. And we had a friend that would come over because he also was stuck at home. We had our little pod of people that we knew it was safe to be around. And we met every Sunday. We were able to keep track of our friends. And actually, it was like a party every Sunday night. Oh, look, we can have somebody come over, because we know that that person didn't go out. Right. And he knew that we didn't go out. So it was a good thing. And we were all really good friends. So that helped. But yeah, I could see where if you're by yourself, that could have been bad. And that's one of the reasons we had him over, because he was by himself. And of course, we had each other. So that made things a lot easier.
My best friend, who I bought this house from, he's a real estate agent and lived by himself. I was more concerned about him being alone. But as soon as we could see each other, he became part of our pod. And then we had two friends that were here from Maine, and they became part of our pod. And then we kind of all made sure we got our first injection together and all of that, that sort of stuff. But we did all the holidays together, including Christmas. And that's the only time I've been in Key West for Christmas.
I did experience some fear and I was kind of freaked out. But I would say it was only maybe a week or something. Because I'm like, you know what? I'm safe. I'm healthy. I have friends and family. With technology, you can talk or you can Zoom with friends, sometimes with group stuff. And I'm just a very resilient person. It's just been part of my life journey.
I think across the board, everybody had percentages of that. I think after a while, you're climbing the wall, you wanted to get out. Everybody was locked in. It was very strange. And I'm sure it pushed some people right over the edge. Fortunately, in my own personal and with my, no, I think we were more concerned about other people and family members and stuff to reach out. I think if you could push yourself out of that, if you think of somebody else other than yourself, it gets you more out of it. But I think we all went through it, and some, of course, more so than others. Fortunately, didn't affect my immediate circle or family.
I perform better in a clutch than I do when things are smooth sailing. And that's when doubt and fears and stuff start creeping into my mind. When I'm in a clutch situation, jackpot situation, I don't allow myself to have that, take over. I just have to keep moving in the forward direction.
For us, one of the big issues was not to bring COVID home. We have 2 grandchildren that are in elementary school. So that's kind of hard. They're going to bring stuff home because of the 80-year-old grandmother, which would be the kid's great-grandmother. We didn't want to bring anything home to her that would compromise her health. So times when it was anxiety producing.
So unfortunately, I had to go home every day. There was no place to stay. And so the stress there was, oh my God, am I going to expose my family to the virus? My daughter, she's 11 now, but she was, 3-4 years younger then. And she wasn't going to school at that time because of the restrictions, the Department of Education. So one aspect, it was like, okay, I'm glad I get to go and see my family every day after work, but it's like, oh, am I going to get them sick? And then on the other hand, the state we live in, Arizona, the rules was very lackadaisical, very, there's nothing to see here. We're not shutting down anything. You want to stay home, that's fine. You want your children to stay home, but the parents that want the children to go to school, you're more than welcome to go to school. So there was this mixed message. And then you had parents who didn't care about the virus because they followed whatever they listened to. And then you had the other parents like us, like, oh my God, what do we do? We don't want our child to be at home all day, every day. They're not learning, their social skills are being affected developmentally. But at the same time, it's like, what do we do? One half of the population is taking it seriously, and then the other is not. I think it was more stressful, I would say, for the people that were stuck at home, like my wife and the children. I can understand that aspect of the stress. So, I mean, like, it was equally stressful, I should say, for people who were stuck at home and also the people that provided the care.
We were okay, but my heart just went out to Amy. She is such a brave person, but that must have been so hard on her. And she's not a crier. She might be what you call a car crier, right? She's not gonna let anybody see you cry. She'd come home and weep almost every day because she's working in the hospital and they just got the ward is full and all that. And then she goes home and she's alone and she can't see her. She's used to seeing her husband and her mom and her dad and her son every day, and now she's alone. And I know that was really, really hard on her. I think at the end of it, though, I think it's made her a warmer person.
I had one friend who was extremely anxious, and to this day, she's retired, and to this day, she does not venture out from her home very often. She's very comfortable with that. And I think overall she enjoys her life, but she's just not going to take any chances.
Something that was really triggering for me, and that was trust. I felt like I couldn't trust the information I was being given about this terrible disease event, what we should do. I mean, do you remember when we were wiping down our grocery bags? And I remember at one point saying to my group of friends before we had to, take a break for a little bit, I think they're not being honest with us. I think there's no way. This has to be in the air. This has to be airborne. And at the time it was like, no, we don't really think. And I thought, I can't trust what I'm hearing from the trustworthy agencies or the trustworthy individuals that we've, as a collective, we've decided, okay, our leadership should be trustworthy. And it made me question trusting in general. I would say for me, that was triggering. Like, what can I trust? Now I can't trust anything. And so I think that was part of the reason why we stayed in for so much, because I couldn't trust. And that, I would say, was the hardest mental struggle that I had. I don't care what they're saying. I don't trust it. So I can't trust anything. And it was airborne, and they weren't being forthcoming with it at the time. And that was harmful. I think that was mentally harmful.
My daughter, she handled it okay. She's a millennial. Her whole generation was like, what the hell is going on here? What is this? What is this? What world have you given us?
I think that the long-term effects of being shut in at a time you're learning to socialize wasn't the best.
I think anxiety and depression for them was I think they were battling that. And my daughter is still battling some of that because I think she's a kid when it happened. She was only 12 when it started. And so for her, she got taken out of school, everything got disrupted, and she lost touch with all of her friends. And then she had to go back into school and everything was different. And I think the kids in her age group, they're having a hard time socially because it disrupted their flow. They're a little bit more immature, in my opinion. Like some of the things happening in high school should have been happening in junior high school, but are now happening in high school instead. So it's kind of strange. It's sort of thrown this kids off a little bit, I think, in terms of their development, their social development. So for her, I think it's been very negative. She did fine academically, but socially, this really disrupted everything. And she's also on the spectrum. So that was a whole other level of it. She already had social things that she wasn't great at. So for her, having to be out of touch with her friends
for a couple years and then try to go back and everybody was disjointed. And I mean, same here. I think a lot of people lost friendships that they were involved in before COVID. Only a few people around here that I had known do I still keep in touch with post COVID. And I'm a grown up. So a lot of the kids seem like they've kind of gotten isolated, I think, because of COVID. And I feel really bad for those kids because I think developmentally, they're going to probably be on a different curve than a lot of other generations because of this.
For me, and I know it was for my kids, missing their friends was very difficult. They had each other, though. That's the good thing. They're very close. My kids are really close. So the usual kid thing, they did video games together and tortured each other like kids do. I would say that the isolation wasn't a good thing, but I can't really say I see long-term effects. I do think that it was harder for my daughter once we were able to go back out to actually do that. Like, okay, we're going back out. And I think it took her a minute. Like, there was again that, is it safe? Is it safe? So I think that will be a long-term effect maybe for kids of a certain age that went through it, that are questioning, who can we trust? What's the real news? I see a little bit of that in them.
I talked to a lot of people whose kids were like graduating that year and they didn't have a graduation. Then they couldn't go to college. Those kids worked really hard to get through that, and then they don't get the benefit of that. And it's kind of sucked. Not only that, but in the case of the transition, some of those kids couldn't go to college. And so it literally disrupted their lives. I talked to one lady who she was trying to get her daughter set up to go to college the next year. And she was calling me to find out if that was going to happen. She had rented an apartment for her and all these things, and she couldn't really use that stuff. She just ended up coming home and doing online classes and stuff. So it's across the board for the kids. They are the ones I feel the most. I feel like they got the hardest situation.
Like many people in her generation, she's in her early 20s, has suffered from anxiety and things like that. And so she would have moments of having anxiety or worrying. But for the most part, she was very brave. And it was really a matter of just keeping in touch every day, talking every day. I think she recognized that we didn't have power in the situation. In a way, I think it was a lesson for all of us, but particularly for her, in surrender. She'd had to surrender to what was happening and let it run its course. And then once we got back to her, she seemed to us to be a little dissociated. She was a little flat, emotionally. And over the next 2 or 3 weeks, she started to open up more and the emotions started to come out and how scary it was. So at some point in the process, I do think she kind of shut down to deal with what was happening, but she started to work through it. And we've just been there for her as far as the mental health things that come along with something like this happening. I think a lot of people have struggled with mental health, but also have been pushed to their limits in different ways and have had to figure out ways to cope.
Yeah, my mental health, it was definitely hurting, especially towards the end of 2020. I'm very open about this, so I'm going to put a trigger warning because some people might be bothered and affected by this, but I had an eating disorder relapse happen at the end of 2020. I think it was just all the stress and something inside of me just snapped. So I ended up, I left it was a nannying job I had. So I moved back to my city. This would have been about August, September 2020. I left that job like, I think early 2021. And I didn't work for like a year after that, just so I could recover. It was, yeah, 2020. It was just rough. Everything happened all at once. And then I felt the effects of it for a couple of years after. Mm-hmm.
I think when you say about younger people and hasn't in some manner tuned themselves to the inner world, when we're younger, we tend to see everything outside ourselves. I got to talk to people. I have to be with people. I have to get that feedback. And if you don't get it, then you can feel bad. But I don't, that problem, I didn't have it then. I had started cultivating that in my 20s. And I remember even back then being a meditator from my early 20s, and yet still not till later, 30s, 40s, like every decade being more and more attuned to not needing that outer validation or perspective. I just go with the flow, and I'm just as happy being all on my own as I am being with people. In fact, sometimes I prefer being on my own. And then in my own family, I would say not that much, because there were situations where everyone had either a similar perspective, people that are interested in meditation and practice that way, or they had good surrounding situations where they lived in the same building, or this idea of making pods with people so that you could have relationships during COVID, and there was very little isolation reported. So I was lucky.
My youngest son that has the family and the children is also a Republican, and I used to be a Republican. So they didn't get vaccinated, and that was really difficult. It was difficult to have conversations with any of them. We did have some get-togethers. There were maybe myself and maybe one other person that had the masks on. And so I can't even imagine what was said. That was a little difficult. And then I couldn't understand how the son that I raised could feel that way or believe those lies or be listening to Joe Rogan. So every time the conversation would go in a difficult angle towards those kind of beliefs, I just changed the subject and still was able to go voting with them and said, we're just not going to be able to talk. We agree to disagree. That's it. I'm here to be grandma. That's it. So got through that. My brother, thankfully, has lived in Seattle for, 5,000 years. And it's very grounding and is a pillar in my family. So he and his wife brought me through.
I just got freaked out because we weren't communicating. I was on the phone and I overreacted. I got freaked out. And he got freaked out about me not getting the vaccination. And his wife got on the phone and kind of smoothed things over for the phone call. And it was rough. He was getting his PhD then, and they were trying to get pregnant. And I think all that was very stressful on him and them. It took months. It took months of talking. And of course I apologized, but he couldn't even talk to me. He was talking about his mental health. I think he was seeing some kind of counselor.
People were thinking they were going crazy because they were stuck in the house, That was just likened to itself as drunk. So if you look at it as a curse, that's exactly what it ends up being. Just look at New York. My God, I talked to people from New York. I mean, the big trucks and putting all those bodies in it, and those nurses having to reuse their mask. And as a nurse, I remember what it was like. And it's just amazing what people put up with. And some people are still struggling now. Well, a little post-traumatic stress disorder.
My son had moved back in with me to help me take care of my mom, but also because he was battling PTSD from military service. And he still battles it to this day. And then he found out he has adult ADHD on top of it. So at least he's on medication for it now. But it was a rough couple of years. Here he is trying to help me take care of my mother, and we discover that he's battling that. And then when COVID hit, we probably all went through a form of depression because of COVID and just because of everything that happened.
I did experience anxiety from time to time. I would just get this extreme feeling of fear, and I would be like, what's going on? Like, nothing provoked it. I mean, I didn't think anything provoked it at that time, but I'm sure a lot of it is suppressed emotions and not processing what was happening at that time.
I would say it was an increased stress of uncertainty and unpredictability. I don't think I was naming it along the way because maybe just for survival, but I had this vision that this is short term and we're going to get through it. So in my mind, it was going to last 6 months or this is what I told myself. And then I just kept putting the goalpost out farther. And then it was a different experience for me, and maybe most people. When it initially started with all the uncertainty, there was a degree of frenzy a little bit. I can remember calling my ex-husband at one point when I heard that stores were closing. And, I got really angry with him. And I said, we had a brand new baby at the time, grandson. And I said, look, we have got to get to every CVS and Walgreens and find the baby formula that he's on, because there'll be no baby food. Like, I, as a grandmother, am completely panicked. So that part felt very reactive, and I just couldn't control that part of myself. I was hitting the drugstores and looking for the baby formula, and yeah, there was a panic about that.
If she had passed a year or more earlier than when she did, I think the depression and the problems from COVID would have probably have been more pronounced for all of us, that we were trying to deal with that too. But because everything kind of happened one on top of the other, it was just like this load just sitting on you, kind of like waiting for the straw that breaks the camel's back. What's next? It's gonna just send me off the edge. And I know it was something that we all worked hard at trying to keep ourselves kind of sane, but at the same time deal with all of the issues we were dealing with the best way we knew how.
The PTSD thing, I just think through everything that happened and try to realize that everyone did everything they could in the right mode. They wanted to help. Everybody tried to do the right thing. Just because it didn't always come out right doesn't make it wrong, because everybody tried to do the right thing. Where I was in the medical field, and at that time, you just didn't talk about what was the right thing. You just did it,
The inmates that survived, and they saw their friends and people that passed away. So we did a lot of grief counseling and psychiatric or psych nursing assessments, and provided trauma-informed courses, seminars, sessions, and kind of did all of this in the prison system for the individuals that were affected so much by this. Personally, I never went to any therapist to process the damage that occurred during the pandemic. But I plan to. One day I should go see somebody.
I really do believe that we are all victims of trauma, PTSD, from what has happened. But it was compounded by the inefficacy of the leaders we had and how they treated it, and all of the anger and all of the ginning up of everything. And it's almost as though we just had one thing compounding on top of another and another and another. And yes, it's very traumatized. I really do believe we probably lost some time of our lives due to that trauma. I really do. And I still think some people are dealing with it. What we want as human beings is we want things to hurry up and go away. We take a pill if we have a headache. We're all about the quick fix. Well, this isn't a quick fix. And a lot of people have already decided that COVID's not here anymore, but that's not true. And we also thought we were going to see less of somebody that used to be in charge, and that's not true. So it's almost as though we're sitting in this tense, anxious moment and thinking to ourselves, how much longer is all of this going to affect us? And we don't have an answer. We don't have an answer.
I just dropped out of the social circle totally. There are barely 3 or 4 people I actually talk to anymore. I was the kind of person who people would call if they had an issue. For all my life, I've always had, the long, big cordless phones. I'd be like this, folding laundry, doing cooking, It's like, my child is like, why do they have to call you, Mom? What can you do for them? I'm like, they need to vent. And I have nowhere to go. but everybody's like dumping on me, and I feel so miserable most of the time because I'm carrying their stuff and worrying about what can I do? I can't do anything, and I'm thinking about the problems all the time. And then one fine morning, I just said, I can't do this anymore, and I can't help anybody. Right? They go back, and a week later, it's the same stuff. So I started weaning people off, and I think that was the best thing I did for myself.
I have been battling depression for a good part of my life. I've been on medication for that. That sort of helped as well. Otherwise, it was, it almost felt like a welcome change. Like we were so busy living life and doing things that we almost lost sight of what was really, really important. And what was really, really important was that, oh my gosh, I can't see my nieces. I can't go and visit them whenever I want. I can't visit with my friends. I can't just jump in the car and do whatever it was that I used to do. So it made us focus on the things that were really, really important. And in a strange way, grateful that we were sick together, because at least we had each other. I wasn't separated from him where I had to worry about how's he doing? Is he running a fever? What about this? What about that? And just make it worse. And I think it was kind of the same thing for him, in that we realized what was important and stuff wasn't important, right? It didn't matter that there's a sale on whatever going on. I couldn't care less. So for us, I think that's what it was. And yeah, this is where I think being sick together really worked out, was that I don't think either of us ever felt lonely, because we weren't that isolated. We were isolated together. So at least there was somebody that if I wanted to talk to, there was somebody there that I could talk to.
One of the things was going out for a drive after dinner. It helped because it got us out of the house. It let us get some fresh air. We didn't stop anywhere. We didn't go to anyone's home. We were just confined in the car, the three of us. But I do believe that that helped an awful lot, because I kept busy with courses and different things. That kept my mind going, and that kept me sane.
What I found in my family, which I'm going to say is my daughters and my son-in-laws, we tended to pull together. And even though I do have a large extended family, I wasn't tapping in with them at all. That my own nuclear family, we kind of hunkered down together, and it just felt less chaotic that way. And we have the kind of family that has a free flow, even though I'm divorced. My ex-husband babysits, I babysit. We all just have that village flow. To a larger degree, my extended family also has a beautiful flow. And had I needed something, of course, anybody could have reached out. But there wasn't the sense of reaching out. There was a sense of getting very insular and extending my taproot as the grandmother of my little tribe down deep. We already have deep connections, but we also have the gift of flow and flexibility and honest expression and emotional intelligence. When I first went back to school and got into psychotherapy, they were teenagers and they'd say, "Don't therapize me." And I'd be like, all right. And then it really became a way of life that we're always therapizing each other and sharing our feelings. So I think that in that way, we were very lucky in that we had freedom of expression and we were able to articulate how we felt.
A lot of telemed sessions for her, and I would suggest that to people because it was something that really worked, and it helped to calm her down. It helped calm a lot of other people down too. And I would suggest that for anyone. I've done it and I would do it again. But that was definitely something that the whole mental state of it all was just like the unknown was hard for so many people, because it was this might be it, right? You stay at home and then it's just like, okay, we're here, we're together, and you try to make the best of it, try to make the most of it.
I have a community of people who do internal work. Huge difference when you don't do nothing about your spirituality, you don't do nothing about anything in your life. There's a huge difference between not doing anything for your mental health from the get-go, from in your 20s and up, and doing something about it. And so the preparation, and I'm pretty sure this is probably a religious wording, but one day you're going to be alone. And what are you going to do when you're alone? You have to prepare yourself mentally and emotionally for those times where there's no other help around. You are going to have to rely on your own mental health or lack thereof. So I hang around with a lot of people who are okay emotionally, mentally. So if there was one, I didn't know about it, but most of them, they were all okay.
I personally knew that I was depressed. I did not have any kind of clinical diagnosis or was prescribed anything or even had conversations with anyone. I knew that the opportunity to understand why was pretty clear. It was pretty clear to me. Honestly, it was the first time in my life that I was alone. I was completely alone. There was no one near me. There was no one with me. I'm a twin, so even in the womb, I had my brother. Okay, so this was something that was very different for me to be experiencing, and I know that I was depressed, that there was so much sadness, and that there had been trauma. But I'm very spiritual in that my sense of connection to spirit has always been so strong that there was a questioning and a curiosity of why. Why was it necessary for me to be alone, to learn to be okay alone? What lessons were in there? What joy was in there? How did I connect with people? My oldest daughter was so depressed living alone during COVID that she actually fell in love over Zoom and ended up marrying him in Spain. That's where he is. That's where his family is. That's where he is from. And she had absolutely no qualms about moving there, about picking up, getting the ticket, and going. Because the direction and because the pull, the knowing was that, yes, this is where I belong. This is where I'm going. My other daughter, I know that she was living with family and that there was other family nearby her and that they had regular events like card games or pizza night or football night. Her particular preference is, okay, I can handle people for a little bit and then I want to be left alone, right? Then I'm closing the door. Okay. So I think for some people, depending on what their preference was socially, that they could all have those different kinds of feelings about anxiety about it. When am I going to be able to? Am I going to be able to? Can I at some point know? Because each day we were all just drawn to, what are the numbers? What's happening? When is there an answer? How do we know what's coming? And so for me, I took each day and pretended that I was on vacation. Well, when you go on vacation, you go, I don't know what's going to happen today, but I'm looking forward to it. Whatever that is, bring it on because I'm on vacation. Okay, so there's this pivot away from the possibility of going down or the pivot of finding the excitement within the moment, whatever that moment is, however that moment presented itself. And so I knew that I had some sadness. I knew that I probably had some trauma to the job. You know, it's so amazing looking back on some of it for me. And so the mental health issue I could see in a lot of people. I know that it comes from a place of everyone being in shock, everyone being told they must adhere, they must stay, new rules imposed where their lives just sort of became frozen, you know, where it was. I've always been sort of optimistic, so it's hard for me to recognize when I'm depressed. Most people have to bring it to my attention. Hey, honey. Ooh.
There's a lot of anxiety. That's another one of the reasons why I started walking. Exercise helps you get those endorphins going after you exercise, and it helps your mental health. There's a ton of anxiety. But again, because of my spiritual practices, I've been trained a long time ago, just you keep turning it over. It comes up because we all can be anxious. We can all be depressed. Our lives have been just disrupted. And at that point in time, none of us really knew how this was going to turn out.
Tai Chi has actually saved my life when I have been depressed, or just like a big issue has come up or a big change came up that I couldn't deal with very well, whether that was actual depression or just overload and not being able to cope in some way.
I'm very lucky in that way because I feel like I have a connection with the other side, I guess, my spiritual side. And anytime I feel overwhelmed, I just ask for help and get it immediately. It isn't something I have to wait for or fill out an application for. I ask for help and I get it. Actually, it was during this when Ryan died, and that his death overshadowed everything. Everything. Our whole family went into a state of brokenness and grief. But we all pulled together and we're trying to work through it, trying to make lemonade out of the lemons and doing everything. His aunt even had a bracelet made in Russian because Russian was his language, said, "What would Ryan do?" So we all wear bracelets, "What would Ryan do?"
And I did my research. I mean, what is the fundamental idea? It's roughly, according to this research, 4 out of 10 believe in psychics today. And even Gwyneth Paltrow on her Goop channel talks about this. New York Magazine talked about, they called it the woo-woo profession in 2019. There's an article by Lisa Helt, March 19, 2019, that the psychic mediums are the new wellness coaches, was the article. And that is so true. I mean, the mental health of this country has helped so many people as being wellness coaches. And it's not only tarot, it's the whole astrology. People are beginning to understand that, okay, why am I going through this? And if I understand, okay, this is what is happening, how do I need to work on this? I know I can't change this, but if I react in this way, then maybe my tomorrow will be, the whole thing.
Because of what I do, both Russ and Olivia, they would come to me, "We're going to be all right, right? We're going to get through this." And I'm like, "Absolutely, you bet we are." And both of them trust me as a psychic. They trust my intuition. I think that having that reassurance on the intuitive level helped them a lot too. But I honestly, I will say that we were one of the lucky ones that got through it.